All right, we're live. We're live. Welcome everybody. Welcome to the stream, the redo. Right, like
That's right.
We're gonna go over and show some. Well, so it's redo, but it's also updated to use newer versions of vCluster stuff, right? So it's going to be taking from like the 3 point whatever model that we had previously, and we're going to be using the 4.0. So it's going to be updated vCluster platform, moving over from I think last time we had Loft. But joined here by Mike Petersen, and then Christian is going to be doing the presentation at first and showing off some of the cool stuff, and then doing the demo. I'm just going to host and hang out, and then I'll present some stuff on vCluster. But I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Christian. Well, maybe we give it like a minute. We give it a minute as people join in, right? Like,
maybe join in.
Right.
Let people straggle in a little bit.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, it'd be cool. So
interactive too, right? So like if you have questions or something like that, post it in there, and then we'll try to answer it like maybe like during the demo or something like that, or I'll answer it in chat if I can answer it while Christian's presenting, or vice versa. But yeah, we'll give everybody like a minute or two to come in, and then I love your picture on there too. What did you use to get that? Did someone draw it at like at a KubeCon or something like that? Or?
I actually no. So what everyone asks, I paid for that. Actually, I have a friend. Actually who I did GitHub Guide to the Galaxy when I was over at Red Hat. She was my co-host there. Her sister is an artist, so I'm like, well, if I'm gonna get like this little drawing of myself to use as my profile picture, like I might as well, one, help a friend out, and two, get an actual artist. So I got the hook up there. So I did not know, but if anyone wants something like that, I know an amazing artist.
Reach out to you.
Yeah, reach out to me because I know an amazing artist. So I've used her actually a few times for other things, just because I like her work. So that's the story behind that. So that's kind of cool.
Awesome. All right, so we got some people in. Let's go ahead and hand it off to you if you want to go and start presenting.
Sure, cool. Again, my name is Christian Hernandez. I am actually the head of community over at Acuity. I'm also an Argo project maintainer, open GitOps maintainer, and co-chair for various cons out there, ArgoCon and GitOpsCon, namely. And so what we're going to talk about today, we're going to automating preview environments with Argo CD and vCluster, right? So like two very, very popular projects out there that are used in the Kubernetes ecosystem. And let me go to, I'm going to talk about the Acuity platform, who Acuity is first, before we dive into what Argo CD is and how it works with vCluster. So the Acuity platform. So Acuity, who's Acuity? Like people always hear that name, Acuity. We are actually the original creators of Argo and Cargo. So the Acuity platform was developed by I guess three of the main co-founders of the Argo project. So Hong, Jesse, and Alex. I guess my boss is here. They developed the Argo project at Intuit, right? They were actually at a company called Athletics, but Intuit acquired them, and when they were at Intuit, they created the Argo project and open sourced that. That's actually how I got to know them, because Red Hat eventually got involved with the Argo project. I got to know them like very, very early on, and they kind of, they dog food everything, right, at Intuit, right? So everything at Intuit, and even now at Acuity, we dog food everything. So they were using Argo in production over at Intuit, and they basically kind of took all those lessons learned, all the best practices, all of that, and codified them into the Acuity platform. And so that's kind of like the backstory of what the Acuity platform is basically best practices codified on from their time at Intuit. We also created Cargo, right, which is like something they've always wanted to create at Intuit, but they didn't have the cycles until they created their own company. So basically the end-to-end GitOps platform, as I like to call it. So the Acuity platform is composed of different solutions, right? We say deploy, promote, and monitor with the Acuity platform for a complete end-to-end GitOps solution, right? So we're using a Cargo for the promotion piece. We have some visibility and monitoring built with AI, and we do deployment with various tools, right? We integrate with various tools, but our main tool to deploy is Argo CD, and that's what kind of we're going to focus on today is Argo CD. And it's speaking of Argo CD. So those of you who are maybe familiar with Argo CD or kind of want to learn more about Argo CD, I am running a webinar next week. I think February 26th. Wow, February! Time's flying. This is what I'm saying. Time's flying, man. We're already almost at the end of Q1. So February 26th, 9 a.m. Pacific time. Scan that there. I'm actually going to post that link into the chat because, as I was telling Mike before, sometimes I just kind of miss that. Always miss the people always miss the scanning of the QR code. So so I'm running a webinar, Argo CD up and running, basically how to get up and running with best practices. So that way you're doing all the good stuff right out of the box. So so if you even if you're already running in production, you can do some of these things that I'm going to be suggesting. So let's talk about Argo CD. So what's Argo CD? So Argo CD is part of the larger Argo ecosystem. We have there's actually, so when I say the Argo project, there's really 4 tools in the Argo project: Argo workflows, Argo CD, which we're going to talk about today, Argo events, and Argo rollouts, right? And so basically from the high level, it's Argo CD is a Kubernetes GitOps controller, so which reconciles live state with the desired state. I'll go over how that looks in a second here. And it does that with some key components, right? So like there's a repository controller, right? Server here that basically interacts with your source of truth. Application controller to make sure all your objects are deployed to where you want them to deploy. And then there's kind of like a server, the API server, where you interact with either with a UI or not, right? And so there's some key custom resources, right? There's CRDs that you need to be familiar with, right? What an application is, which I'm going to go over, and an app project, which is basically a unit of tenancy. We're not going to go over that too much, right? So if you want to learn more, remember, go to that webinar, sign up to that webinar, which I'll go deep in some of these CRDs, right? Some of these components. And again, it was born at Intuit, right? Argo CD was born there and donated to the CNCF. As I said before, now those creators are now here at Acuity. And so Argo CD, the idea behind Argo CD is that it was built for developers, right? So everyone always asks me, like, what's the difference between like Argo and Flux? It's like, well, Flux was built for SREs, right? With SREs vision in mind, but Argo CD was built for developers, right? So the user experience, the UX, was very, very important to Hong, Jesse, and Alex when they were creating Argo CD. It was really, it's like, we're building this for developers, so we need to make this very feature rich for developers. So they're adding things like, support for SSO, RBAC. They needed to make it multi-tenant. They needed to have native support for Helm and Customize because it's, let's face it, those are the, top 2 tools that are used alongside Kubernetes. They added support for like hooks, meaning that there's pre or post sync hooks, things that you need to happen. That's kind of like outside the purview of Argo CD. There's support for that as well. And again, Open GitOps compliant. Members of the Acuity team were part of bootstrapping the Open GitOps project, myself included. I was again, I'm a maintainer there, so it's Argo CD along with Flux is a Open GitOps compliant tool. So that is it's built with GitOps in mind, but also with developer experience in mind. So one of the most popular things is the UI for Argo CD, only because you're kind of taking away kubectl, the command line, away. You don't have to teach anyone that. You kind of just have this feature-rich UI to work with here, right? So how does Argo CD manage applications, right? So first you kind of have to figure out what Argo CD actually does, right? It looks at your source of truth. You define something, right? You define, I have a bunch of YAML in a Git repo. You point it to that, or you can point it to a Helm repository. It's like, hey, I want to deploy this Helm chart. Here's this Helm repository, and here are the values. Deploy that for me. Or now, right, OCI registry. You can point it to an OCI registry. Shout out to Blake, who's writing that support for Argo CD right now. He's kind of single-handedly wrote that, so that's going to be big for Argo CD. And basically, it'll take these sources of truth. It'll kind of process them, and then at the end, it'll spit out things like deployment services, ingress, really any Kubernetes object. And the idea is that Argo CD can deploy that to whatever clusters it's managing on, or you can add kind of external clusters. So and you can have this kind of sort of hub and spoke design where Argo CD looks at your source of truth and then deploys it to your destination. and then it makes sure, again, GitOps compliant, it continuously reconciles and deploys those resources there. So it's really it's really kind of it follows that Unix philosophy, right? It does one thing, but it does really, really well, right? You point it to some sort of repository, you point it to a destination, and Argo CD will make that true. If you go and make an out of bound change, right? Like if Mike comes here and does a kubectl edit, Argo CD will say no, no, no. It'll revert it back because it is looking at the source of truth. So, I talked about like an Argo CD application. Right? I've used the small A application when I say deploy application, but there's also a large A. So it's actually a CRD of Argo CD. So Argo CD has this this custom resource called that application, right? It kind of sits at a high level, and it's really these are kind of this is kind of like a base kind of minimal deployment of an application where it's basically you set up a project, right? There's a default project. Again, if you are multi-tenant, this could be another project, right? Like it can be, a team, right, owns a project. Again, I'll go over that in a future webinar. But the things that you want to know is that you have a source, right? Like where am I grabbing this? So in this instance, I'm deploying this Git repo, and there's a bunch of YAML in this directory called guestbook. I imagine there's guestbook YAML in there. And so the destination is basically you give it a namespace and you give it a target cluster, right? So like, whatever, this cluster could be a specific environment. It could be a specific region. Doesn't matter. That spec destination name field there, that's kind of like the name of the cluster you added to Argo CD, right? And then you can have different sync policies. My favorite one is create namespace because I don't want to manage namespaces in Git, right? So I have an application managing the namespace for me. Gerald, if you're watching, this is something Gerald at Red Hat and me and argue about all the time. So if you're watching, yes, I use this because this is just my preference, right? So this is kind of like my preference of deploying an application. So one of the things that limitations that people run into right away, and you may see it right now right away, or you may not see it right away, is that it's really one-to-one relationship, right? You give it a source, you give it a destination, and really it's just one-to-one, meaning like there's just one cluster, right? So like if you have this, if you want this guestbook application to be deployed to multiple clusters, you're going to need multiple application definitions, right? So in this case, that's why I put environment there. Let's say if you have dev, stage, production, you need to have 3 separate applications, even though it's pointing to the same source code repository. You need 3 because it's a one-to-one relationship. So the Argo CD project, so the Argo CD community found ran into this problem right away, right? As soon as you start scaling, as soon as you start getting in production, you ran into this right away. So this is pattern that emerged out of it. So notice back here, I said any Kubernetes object, any Kubernetes object. Well, what's an Argo CD application? It's a Kubernetes object. So I can actually use an application to deploy another application. So this is kind of what the pattern that we call app of apps, right? An application of applications, right? So that way, it was really conceived as a method of bootstrapping Argo CD, right? So like, I have, 1,000 applications I need to deploy. I don't want to run kubectl 1,000 times, right? I just want to run one application, right? A bootstrap application, and that deploys the rest of my application. But you can do things like, I have this, I have guestbook that deploys guestbook dev, but guestbook stage, guestbook prod, right? So like then you have the ability just to have one resource to deploy multiple applications. So the limitation of this, though, there's no templating, right? It's basically you basically are deploying static CRDs at that point, and it's not dynamic, meaning that anytime you add like another environment, for example, or another cluster, you have to create another application manually. And so because of that, we created something called application sets, right? So application sets actually originated at Red Hat, and then it was later, donated upstream to Argo CD. So now it's part of the actual project. And application sets it can be seen as like an application factory, right? Its primary job is just to generate applications, right? And so that's why there are things called generators, right? So it's dynamic. So meaning that depending on what's happening, whether it be you add a new cluster, whether it be you want, anytime you add a microservice to a Git repo, it'll automatically deploy that. Or you add a directory into a specific Git repository. It's dynamic, meaning you don't have to manually generate those applications. What ends up happening is that the application set will monitor what's going on and it'll automatically deploy that as well. And so there's templating built in because of that. So it's dynamic and it has templating. And it actually, so I do like to call out that it actually doesn't replace app of apps. It's just, it has a place beside it. And so here, the example I'm showing is called a pull request generator, meaning that the pull request generator, it's looking at your Git repo, and anytime there's a pull request, it'll generate an application. So this is actually really, really handy because a lot of the times, since Argo CD, again, Unix philosophy does run one thing really, really well. As soon as something is merged into main, it'll deploy that, or whatever branch you're tracking. But for main, for example, as soon as something merges, it'll deploy that. But there's obviously a need to preview that environment somehow, right? You want to be able to see what gets deployed, right? So basically, pull request generator, which we'll focus on, for the rest of this webinar, it creates an application when a new pull request happens, right? And on the example there on the right, you see that I'm tracking this specific repository for my Git repo, and I'm actually going to filter out based on labels. So it's pretty flexible. It's like, oh, I don't want to deploy everything that's a PR. I want to kind of focus on things that are labeled specifically. And so that kind of replaces that helps that idea of that one-to-one, right? It kind of solves that for that problem. Now we have an application set that is dynamic and with native templating and has the flexibility of doing different generators. In this, in our case, that we want something to deploy anytime there's a pull request. But with the pull request generator, there's still one kind of lingering issue there, is that a pull request generator still needs a cluster to deploy to. So our Argo CD only deploys the clusters that it knows about. It doesn't actually create them. There's no mechanism in Argo CD to create them. So it still needs somewhere to put. So when you create a pull request and I label it as preview, Argo CD needs to put that somewhere. You need to give it a cluster. So then that means you need to create a cluster somehow, right? It takes time. You want to copy, you're basically making copies of environments, which can be laborious, right? It can be costly, right? So then this is kind of where you need a solution as dynamic as application sets are, right? You want to be able to monitor your, you want to be able to preview your environments without having the need to like spin up and spin down, clusters, right? Especially if they're temporary. And so I think
where'd you find something like that?
Yeah, where would you find something? I think this is perfectly where you slide in, because I do believe you have a solution for this issue right here.
vCluster, right? Like
yes,
we're going to use vCluster, right? How about some virtual Kubernetes clusters that like have much lower cost and spin up super quick? All right, I'm going to get through some slides here real quick. Then we're going to hop into the demo. I'm just going to talk about what virtual clusters are and give you a little bit of background on that. And then, like I said, we'll hop into the demo. I'm going to be quick. I'm going to talk quick. So here we go. All right, so virtual Kubernetes clusters. So the next gen Kubernetes architecture for maximum efficiency and cost savings. Over 40 million have been deployed, over 8,000 stars on GitHub. There's a bunch of like talks and stuff from KubeCon on YouTube that you can watch if you want to learn more about it. All right, so we all love Kubernetes, but 10 years later, it still has challenges, right? You got people with huge fleets of clusters, lots of tools to manage it, security concerns, resource wastage, and 70% of organizations identified over-provisioned Kubernetes as the leading cause for their surge and spin. Like every time a developer wants a cluster, you're giving them a cluster, and that gets super expensive because half the time it's like 3-node cluster. So optimize your Kubernetes infrastructure with virtual clusters. So instead of giving each person their own virtual cluster, or each preview gets its own, cluster, instead what you can do is you can go multi-tenancy on a single cluster and create a virtual cluster in it. So you can share your platform stack. You can share CRDs up. You can install different CRDs. You can install stuff that's separate from the base cluster. It's a lot easier to manage, a lot less overhead. Well, a lot less overhead for the people to keep up with, a bunch of different shared platform or platform stacks across a bunch of different clusters. So you can maximize your Kubernetes efficiency and performance. So you have sleep mode, the shared platform stack, multi-tenant clusters, better tenant isolation, self-service Kubernetes. So you have a UI where your users can deploy their own Kubernetes clusters, developer autonomy, and faster velocity, and then sharding. So 75% of the time, this is one of the upsells too, is sleep mode. 75% of the times your developer environments run without being used. So your developer comes in, he does some work maybe for an hour or two, then it's just running, and you just have these pods running that aren't actually doing anything. So we've got sleep mode. Sleep mode will automatically put those virtual clusters to sleep and the workloads. Now, if you're using Argo CD, you got to put something in there to actually say, hey, no, ignore the Argo CD requests that are coming in to always check to make sure things are running. That way it'll actually go to sleep. So you're probably not running that with stuff that's production that's always getting pulled. So save money when your developers aren't interacting with their cluster. So it'll keep clusters off by default, automatically detects putting environments to sleep, and then quickly wake up the virtual clusters whenever they need them. You can even schedule it, right? You can schedule it to come up maybe like an hour, 2 hours before they come in, and then to go to sleep maybe like an hour after they leave if you want to make sure that they're going to sleep. And the shared platform stack reduces duplication headache. So instead of running 40 versions of Cert Manager, 40 versions of OPA, and all that, you can run it on a single cluster and then share that up to your users, right? So instead of having all these different versions and having to manage them and then users using different CRDs that you want, you can have it on the base cluster, share up to virtual clusters, and they don't have to manage that. They just deploy their application. You can share ingress and load balancers. So basically all these virtual clusters are using the same IP address and using the same ingress controller. And then you can reduce your Kubernetes cost basically with virtual clusters. So multi-tenancy, like I said, shared platform stack, sleep mode, combined all of them for max savings, right? Like huge savings if you're running all this stuff together and you like for the most part your stuff's all sleeping. You can support a bunch of developers, kind of like the over provision stuff you used to do with virtual machines. Think of it like that. You're over provisioning and then you're betting on when people are actually working. And then what they enable you to do is like reduce your costs, self-service for dev test and QA, and multi-tenancy for apps. So like some of our customers, what they're doing is they're doing their SaaS. So instead of deploying a single SaaS to each EKS cluster, they're using virtual clusters and they're using node groups and stuff like that to separate out the workloads for their users. Other customers are using it to set up developer environments so that their users can log in, create a virtual cluster, and then deploy to it. And then here, I'm gonna quickly get through some of these. This is what the actual virtual cluster looks like. Everything's still running on the host cluster, right? So it's going to have the speed of a Kubernetes cluster. We're not adding virtualization on top of it. We're just running Kubernetes, and then we're doing some magic to make things sync and then share CRDs up and down. But with that, I hope that was actually pretty quick. Let's hop into the let's go ahead and hop into the demo if you want.
Yeah, it's very it's like one of those things where it's like once you see it and go through it, you go, oh, it's like you get that like, oh yeah, like it's because I know when we first did this, we were going back and forth, right, with the demo, that it wasn't until like I got through the entire demo, I'm like, oh, like that's my aha moment. Like it's one of those things. So so yeah, like let's go through the demo here. I have an Argo CD instance here. This is the Acuity platform, so it just kind of real quick, as you can see,
I'm gonna interact with you, it's not presenting anymore. So I'm gonna interact.
Yeah, exactly. yeah. So like it's these are kind of like rubber stamped, right? So like we have an API, we have a Terraform provider. So like for those of you who are platform engineers, if you are providing some sort of self-service thing, the Acuity platform is perfect for that, because you can kind of like stamp and manage your Argo CD instances using either Terraform or our API. We're building a backstage provider as well. So so kind of just so like when I'm flipping back and forth, like I'm actually using an Argo CD instance managed by the Acuity platform. And I have a cluster installed here. So I have my AKS cluster here, which then translates to Argo CD. Let me make this a little bigger. Argo CD here running that cluster here. So I have a bunch of plugins installed, right? So like I actually deployed the vCluster platform using Argo CD. And so if I go to the details, I have like an AI assistant, right? If I can ask what was the last sync status, right? I can ask that a question. Hopefully this is okay, cool. Sometimes when you have like like a vendor account, right? Like a work account, like sometimes they don't like turn on all the things for you. So this was actually turned on. The audit logs, right? This is another plugin, so you kind of see who did what. As you can see, I did a bunch of stuff here. and kind of like Dora metrics here. This hasn't actually been running for. Does I got even data? Yeah. So so it's kind of where I deploy the vCluster platform. So vCluster platform gives you this kind of nice UI here. This is my there we go. It's my ingress controller is. I will tell the story afterwards. So it's not what I wanted it to be. But so anyway, I have the vCluster UI here, which is actually kind of cool. That you can also do like click ops type of thing, right? I did everything through declaratively, right, through the Helm chart, but you can give this to your to your tenants, right? Like if you're managing vCluster, like right here I have a different project. I created a project, right? You do multi-tenant things here as well. And so I actually have go ahead. Go ahead.
So both Acuity and vCluster, right, they're going to give you a public endpoint where you're going to define stuff and hit that public API to create things, right? So you can have multiple Argo CD clusters behind Acuity, and you're just like selecting them. So you have this public endpoint where your Argo CD instances don't have to be public, right?
Yes.
Is that how you're
exactly? Yes.
Same thing with vCluster.
Exactly. Yeah. This have here. So I have this application running here. So I have this, a Go BG, which means it's basically a Go application that does blue green deployments, right? I have this currently in production. I have this blue box, right? Which is what this application is here, is deploying this blue box here. So, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to, where is my,
He skipped some of the magic where he did all this deployment for the vCluster platform using Argo and defined everything too. So.
Yeah. Well, some of the some of the magic, right, is the what is it? I think I have it here. Yeah,
all the stuff's automated for you. So like if you wanted to deploy a different vCluster endpoint, he could.
Yeah. So which is vCluster, right? I basically deployed the application, and I have that defined in with Argo CDs, right? So it's like basically Argo CD. It's like you said, magic, right? I just define it once, and I can just deploy that, and I can create another tenant if I want, and all of that awesome stuff. So here I have deploy overlays default. Let's just change this customization. All right, I want to go. Let's say we're all platform engineers, right? So some code changed somewhere, right? And so hey, there's a new version called green. So I'm like, okay, I'll deploy that. And so actually, let me do get checkout green. So get add. Get commit. So
people who aren't used to Argo right now, you've got Argo CD pointed at this repository. You're doing a pull request. So you're changing something. You're changing the application.
Yeah, I'm changing the application definition. Correct. Yeah. So I'm going green there. Always sign your commits like a good citizen. Get push origin green. Cool. So then now I have a new version here. This is standard Git workflow. I'm like, okay, cool. Let's create a pull request. Let's create that pull request. And here I have a pull request that shows blue and then green, right? And so nothing has happened. Yeah. Nothing has happened, actually. So like you see vCluster just kind of humming along. You see Argo CD humming along. So let's check out why, right? Like why is nothing happening? Let's take a look at the definition here. Yes, I'm a Vim guy. So here, as I mentioned, we're using the pull request generator, right? So here, I'm actually using two generators. I talked about one during the presentation, right? This was the pull request generator. Again, this is the exact one that I showed in the demo, right? I'm looking at my repo. I'm looking at the repo go blue green deploy. But then now I'm filtering out based on the labels, right? So like since I didn't label this anything, Argo CD doesn't do anything. vCluster doesn't do anything. I'm using a special.
Who's got the power to label, right? The main
exactly.
Reviewers.
yeah, exactly. Who has the power to label, right? So like this is kind of you can kind of build guardrails, right? Like who has the power to label, who's so not just every PR gets generated, right? So you can like even scope down who can do a PR. But even further than that, who can preview environments, right? Who can add this label? So you can build controls in there as well. And I'm also using a a special generator called a matrix generator, right? Which is basically I'm combining two generators, because anytime I label preview, I don't want it to deploy anywhere else other than a vCluster instance, right? So I'm actually looking for a specific label that vCluster that you can add to your vCluster instance, right? So like right there, I'm looking for so not only create an application that has a pull request that is labeled preview, but on top of that, only deploy it to clusters that are labeled with this vCluster label. So then I kind of like scope it down, further down there. And then the rest of this is just templated out. It's a standard Argo CD application. So I created that pull request. Why didn't anything happen? Well, because I need to label it. So let's do this. So let's, do we get a drum roll here? Do you have you need to get one of those? Yeah, exactly. you need to get one of those. Yeah, close enough. You need to get one of those.
One of those. I don't know if you can hear.
Yeah, a sound pad or something. Oh, there you go. You got it.
I do.
That's not a drum roll.
I haven't used it.
Okay. Oh, you haven't used it. All right. There's no drum roll.
That.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. After it's done, for sure. So then I label this as preview. So this kicks off actually a lot of things. So this kicks off actually a GitHub action that interacts with the vCluster API. So here it's going here for a while, and this is actually this should kick off. Yeah. So here, do you kind of want to explain what's going on here in terms of like how this vCluster is getting created with that GitHub action?
So vCluster platform is like all CRDs and stuff. So you're just defining, create this virtual cluster, and you have a template that's in there, and you're saying use this template to create this virtual cluster, and it's just hitting the API endpoint and like creating it. There's actions that you can use within the action that'll create stuff for you, delete stuff, like it'll install the vCluster CLI, and then it'll run the vCluster platform login and then create and all that. So you can create stuff, you can add links and stuff if you want to as well. Like there's different sections or different things you can add into, like say, okay, link this to the PR. You do a bunch of stuff, right? Like you can use specific templates and permissions and different things. Basically, it's just hitting this vCluster platform, AKS CHX cloud endpoint, and it's saying create this thing for me, so you can delete it too afterwards, right? But not only vClusters, you can create everything. Like everything in here, you can create a new vCluster demo, project,
like project, users or anything like that. And what's really cool is I created a custom virtual vCluster template, which actually, as a side effect, adds as you see what it's doing right now, it adds this new vCluster to the Acuity platform, right? So it's actually ultimate flexibility and in automation, where it's like, okay, well, if there's something special that you need to do, you can actually create your own custom template, right? And I actually created this template based on like the default one, so I actually didn't deviate too much. I just added kind of like specific Acuities, specific things. So as soon as that, I need to refresh this page. As soon as that's added, this will take a while here. I should probably show what's going on in the background here. So if I do, I do here, as you can see, I have the vCluster. It created a namespace. And actually in this namespace, it's creating like all these containers that are running inside of this namespace, right? And so this is kind of, and this here is the you actually explained this to me. This pod here, the specific pod, is actually the Kubernetes API endpoint, or is like the
vCluster coming
endpoint.
Up,
yeah, there's vCluster coming up, right? And so I can actually
you've got your magic around it. So the vCluster comes up, and you've got your magic around it to add everything. So it shows up as a cluster that can be deployed on Argo CD, right? Like, and then you're deploying that into it.
Yeah. So then it looks like this is coming up.
The virtual cluster.
No.
Yeah, it's an API. It's a Kubernetes API that comes up, right? Like, and it's got storage for it. So either like SQLite or etcd, whatever you want to configure, and then core DNS and all that. So your application is still going to run on the base cluster. The virtual cluster is running on the base cluster, but it gives you that extra layer, of not just having a namespace. You get an entirely new API. So if you want to install your own CRDs, you can, right? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, I can actually log into this. I actually have I have a script that does this. I think Mike, with the vCluster CLI, you can do this.
Yeah, you just vCluster connect. So like for them, we've got videos and we'll show your way here. You're doing everything like super automated, so it'll make it.
Yeah.
If you're old
So
school,
I
you just
have,
want to do vCluster Connect, you can do that, and it'll just change. It'll port forward, and it'll set up a new context for you, and it'll connect into it, and then you could just like view stuff in there, right?
yeah. So here I exported the kube config from vCluster, so I just grabbed that, and then I could get. So as you can see, it's a very very tiny Kubernetes cluster because there's only 2 namespaces. Right now is the Acuity agent and the whatever the kube system, right? Like the kind of like very very bare minimum system here. I do see an issue here where I don't see this refresh.
As it's like a new API, you can add your own, namespaces, or your users can add their own namespaces, right? So the users think they have their own Kubernetes cluster.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see here. Oh, where is my? I might have to do some live debugging because everything's
tested
working.
it multiple times, and now it's like we're live. Here we go.
Yeah. Now we're live, and now it's not working, right? Like it literally worked last night when I tested it. And so, okay, so that is there. Let's take a look at. Yeah, clusters up. So everything's working actually, except Argo CD. So like everything is actually working. So let's do an Argo CD login.
Maybe you're actually still running.
Oh, maybe, yeah.
Like it might be deploying the app. Not be completed. Okay.
Yeah, that went there. gRPC web. Oh,
hey everybody! I know we got people commenting stuff from all different things. Like I posted the comment on there too. This is something new for us. We're doing StreamYard to everywhere. So we see your highs. Hello. And I'll try to post on LinkedIn and stuff too. I'm just trying not to have too many things open. Struggle ops. Yeah, basically.
Yeah. Let's see here. Oh, wait. List app set.
And then outside that, while he's troubleshooting too, we have some videos and stuff too, kind of showing some easy stuff to get started with GitHub Actions and like creating virtual clusters. Yeah, the strike of the demo gods.
The strike of the demo gods, yeah. Oops, it's Argo CD. I know app set list. Okay, so the app set is there. It might be the refresh thing. I did change.
There it is.
We weren't patient enough, is what it was. Yeah.
You don't sit there and refresh like 100 times in a row.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we weren't patient enough. Yeah, exactly. I was waiting for the 1,000 refreshes I clicked. So it deployed this application, as you see, automatically to my cluster. And so if I go back to the which one was it? This one. Okay.
To go back to VMs and bare metal, right? Like I don't know if I'd have the patience.
Yeah,
it takes too long.
Yeah, exactly. It takes too long. Yeah, exactly. I'm waiting for it to hear. So you can see here that it deployed to the vCluster 77 seconds ago. The application, right? And so if I could do let's do a port forward of, we are on preview 33. Cool. And then so now we have this blue, right? And then let's do another tab and let's do the green one, which is 8081. Next time I do this demo, I'm going to do it with the ingress endpoint.
Okay.
Maybe not on AKS for reasons. So we have a blue box here. That's the production version, right? That's this version, and we got the pull request 33 deployed, right? That's what the 33 is. So in case anyone is wondering, pull request.
Expand on what you said real quick too. So you're talking about, we glossed over like a heavy thing. Ingress. So you can put ingress in front of the virtual cluster, right? Too, and you can have ingress to where it syncs from the virtual cluster to the host cluster, and your applications can have ingress and certs and all that stuff too. And you can share up like the cluster issuer, and you can share up like the ingress controller, right?
Yes,
ingress class.
Exactly. Yeah, ingress class. Yeah, and so and all that can be automated, right? So this is like, there's like the points of automation. It's like, well, we didn't have so much. I'm like, what can we show? I'm like, that's really cool. Like, there's just so much, right? And so and none of that can be automated, which is cool. So we have a green box and the blue box, which is that's the green one is the pull request 33, right? Which is where I get that 33 number in case anyone cares. So
now you're ready to do your review, right? Looks green to me.
It looks green to me. Yeah. So it looks like it's passing it's passing it's passing QA here, right? So visual inspection looks good. Everything looks good. So at this point, we're going to merge this pull request, right? And so let's merge that. So what's really, really cool about the pull request generator, if nothing's there, it's just going to delete the application. I'm on top of that, and I have a automation built into place. So once the application is deleted, I delete the vCluster, but I think you can just put them to sleep at that point, right? Like, so I'm doing it. I'm doing it through a GitHub action.
Yeah.
I don't have to delete it, right? Like you can set up rule sets in vCluster Pro, or they call it vCluster Pro now, right?
vCluster platform. Yeah. But yeah, you can, say in the template. In the template, you can add like an auto delete after it's been, not running for a long enough time, right? Because as soon as Argo CD stops pulling and caring about that application, the vCluster is not going to have any traffic to it, and you'd be like, delete after a day of inactivity or even like a couple of hours, right?
Yeah.
But as long as Argo CD is hitting it, it's active, right? Because that API is getting hit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I actually have a GitHub action that'll delete the vCluster.
Yeah.
But then at this point, like you can say in production, like I probably when I'm actually not like doing them, if I'm putting this in production, I'll probably putting it to sleep and then deleting it after a day or whatever, right? Because I would kind of want to have it hang around for a little bit, right? Like, because you never know. But I'm going to confirm this merge, right? Like I'm going to merge my own pull request, right? Patting myself on the back. I'm going to delete this. Delete this branch, right? Because we're using trunk-based development, like a good citizen here. So that actually kicks off a GitHub action that all it does is just deletes the vCluster. Actually, I'm not. If you want to take a look at it, it's can I look at it here? Yeah. It'll probably deleted virtual cluster. That's all I did, right? That actually doesn't interact with Argo, because what Argo does automatically, as soon as that cluster is deleted, and that pull request generator no longer has a cluster, so it just kind of deletes that app. And as you can see, the sync time, as soon as I merged it, the production one syncs. So if that goes away. But if I refresh this, oh wait, I need to do my I wait for it to come up a little bit. There it goes. Now I'm just a green box here. Now I have this in production, so I have all that set up to where now I can actually doing GitOps when people do pull requests against this against my environment, right? Against this against the source of truth and against my Git repo. Someone that wants to preview this before merging it can then just label preview it for me, so that way I can just like take a quick look, right? Maybe it passed some automation, maybe it went through some CI where the code is fine, but you kind of want to visually inspect it. You want to play around with it a little bit, right? You want to kind of manually do back in the day, I used to be part of an e-commerce site, right? Like early in my career, right? Like you still, even though there's automation, you still kind of want to like do a test order, right? Or something like that, right? If you're really old school like me, you want to do a test order all the way through visually. You can do that without having to like spin up, another EKS cluster or AKS cluster or another whole Kubernetes cluster or another VM or whatever it is.
So like all your developer did, right? They just did a pull request. It went in and then you did a preview, it deployed the thing. But now like this is very simple like demo of like the coloring and stuff, right? Like you can also deploy the CRDs that are running on the host cluster, like a newer version of a CRD. Like say they want to test their application with like a newer CRD.
Yes,
and make sure
absolutely.
That the spec isn't broken or anything like that, or like, it's not so old that like everything's new and it's like doesn't work anymore. API gateway at ingress or something, right? Like you can test it there on the vCluster on the same cluster that you're running other stuff. You do dev test preview all on the same host cluster, right? So you can expand out what
exactly.
You have this example? Are we able to share this example too? Like I can post it. I'll post it like in the video and some other places, or here if you send. Send me the link on.
So I have two repos, right? The actual control plane, right? Which is so this is kind of what a little sneak preview of my Argo CD webinar. I always run at least two Git repos. One for the control plane, meaning like for the stuff that makes the the Kubernetes cluster run, right? So like basically installing Argo CD, installing the application sets, and then I have actually the Git repo of the actual application, which has what do you call it? So the GitHub Actions. So if anyone looks at this GitHub Actions, don't look at mine. Look at Mike's. Because Loft has actually specific GitHub Actions. I just do everything in shell because I try to do this.
Christian's doing it manually, but you control.
Yeah. I actually just download the vCluster CLI and just do it there. But there's actually GitHub Actions that you can use that are better than mine. So look at mine just to see what's going on. But there's actual Loft GitHub Actions that you can use that is so much better.
I'll add those links too on the live stream we have on YouTube. And let me remove you from here, and then I don't know. Do we have any questions? Let's answer some questions if anyone has questions.
Yeah, let's answer a question.
People here. If you don't have
Yeah.
any
Let's answer
questions,
some
we'll just-
questions. We have some time. We have
I have a-
Kingdon actually. So Kingdon from the Open GitOps community, he said he's a big fan of vCluster API. I didn't know there was a provider
Cappy.
for Cluster API for Loft. Yeah,
Cappy.
that's really cool.
You do Cappy,
Yeah,
Terraform, right? You can do Helm. You can do
That's really cool.
however you want to deploy it, you basically can, right? And especially with like the platform, there's a CRD. So the difference between open source and platform is open source is Helm charts, right? But a lot of the work you do with that Helm chart and the vCluster YAML can be converted over to doing with vCluster platform, which is like the enterprise. All right, so here's my question to you.
Yes.
You work in the open source all the time, and you're used to, forking your repository and then doing your work there, right? You fork your repository, you do your work there, and then you submit a pull request, right?
Yeah.
Do you do that for enterprise stuff too? Because you're talking about trunk based. Do you do that for enterprise stuff too? Are you still forking it, or are you just like submitting your branches and doing pull requests to the main enterprise branch?
Yeah, I do to the main enterprise branch. So
Okay.
I'm a big fan of trunk based development. So
Okay.
I'll always do it a pull request to main, right? So that's what I
open
typically
source
do.
like the project thing where I fork. So I'm like, oh, am I doing it wrong? Right? Like it feels so wrong. It's
Exactly.
I don't want to expose something that I'm not supposed to expose.
Yeah,
Right, well,
yeah. I mean, it's completely flexible. I mean, like, it's kind of like whatever works for you. But in general, like best practices for GitOps is that you use trunk-based development and then you PR against the main branch, and you only use short-lived kind of feature branches.
Okay,
so
awesome. What are any questions or anything yet? Hopefully everybody likes this new format. So we're going to try this format a little bit too, to where we're using StreamYard and we're going everywhere, right? So if you join us on StreamYard, welcome. Hopefully you got some cool stuff out of it, and I think you'll be able to view the video and stuff like that later. But then you can also, like I said, watch it on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter. And then let me do a plug, and then I'll give you a plug too. So we have multi-tenancy March starting, which is going to be starting next week. If you search multi-tenancy March and Loft, you're going to be able to find it. I should post the link. I'll post the link when you talk and do you do your outro. Let me get the link. I should have been prepared. Let me get the link so I can post.
Yeah. So it's just if you want to just add my screen real quick before you
let me go add you real quick again.
Yeah,
there you go.
Cool. Yeah. So really, I'm doing a webinar, Argo CD up and running. So up and running meaning that like let's get the best the idea behind this is you get the best practices from the install from the get-go. So that is the goal of this webinar. It's like okay, like I want to set up Argo CD. I've been playing around with it. What are some of the things that I need to know before actually like doing a production install? So I doing tips, tricks, kind of my best practices, my opinion, right? So I'll differentiate between the two, because sometimes I have an opinion, but doesn't mean that doing something else is wrong. It just means I have a different opinion. But there are some best practices around it, right? Based on experience, not only for me, but from Acuity, from Intuit, from folks that have been using Argo CD around for a long time, right? So Argo CD up and running February 26th. Scan that. Take a look at the Acuity YouTube channel. We had the Argo CD up and running is the first of a series of webinars. It's actually the second of a series of webinars. We did the first one called GitOps Best Practices, right? Kind of generic best practices there. I think Kingdon was there hanging out as well. People from the Flux community were always always interested, right? I'm always part of the GitOps community, which means that it's we're all friends here, so it was really cool. I did generic GitOps best practices, so check that out on our YouTube page. That webinar is up and running. It's kind of the precursor to this. So I am giving you, if you are attending this webinar, I am giving you homework. Go watch that first one on our YouTube channel. I'll post the link to our YouTube channel here shortly. So
awesome. And then the next day, so you're with Christian on the 26th. On the 27th, join us for the State of Multi-Tenancy and Kubernetes with Daniele from Learn K8. So we're going to have 6 webinars in a row. So we're going to do a session where we present, and then we're going to have a workshop, and then another session, and another workshop, and a session, another workshop. Sign up and get access to all these. So you can post to YouTube. Awesome. Just get access to all these, and then hopefully you have fun with it. So it's gonna be a busy March. It's gonna be a busy February for Christian, busy February for me. March, and then I don't know, maybe we'll do something together again here. And like, are you going to KubeCon?
Yeah, I'm going to KubeCon. So if anyone's going to KubeCon, come by the Acuity booth or the Argo booth. I'm going to be, again, going back and forth between open source and my company. So I'll be there. If you're going to ArgoCon, I'll definitely be there. I'm emceeing it. So if you're going to be at KubeCon or ArgoCon, stop by, say hi. Love talking to everyone, especially fans of Argo CD and GitOps in general.
Awesome. I'll say thanks for everybody for joining. I hope you had a good time. Hopefully it was entertaining. I was entertained. I always like watching Christian do demos and stuff like that. He worked on it a little bit like last week, and I was hoping like, oh, how do we get this to work? And we got to work, and it felt pretty good. So
it was awesome. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Thanks everybody for joining. And yeah, reach out to either of us if you want. Like I'm on the Kate Slack and then the CNCF too. If you want to talk to us. So thanks again.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining.